And I believe it's the background for the third angel's message, because do we not have to go and explain to people what it means that God's wrath will be poured out without mixture and the wicked will be consumed? Are we ready to do that without leading people to serve God from fear? And if they serve him from fear, they'll become his enemies. So we have to be able to explain God's wrath. And I think you may find, as I do, there's no place better outside of the cross than the book of Hosea. By the way, did Ellen White understand things this way, speaking within the family? Just a couple of places I brought along among many. Look, God does not stand toward the sinner as an executioner of the sentence against transgression, but he leaves the rejectors of his mercy to themselves to reap that which they have sown. That sound like Hosea 11? He gives them up. Time after time she says this. Yes. Oh, yes. That's Great Controversy 36. Let me read another one. I'll give you the reference first because I often forget the references. This is First Selected Messages, 1SM 235. This is right after the Minneapolis General Conference when the Plan of Salvation received such attention. And Ellen White wrote this as something that was not understood at the meeting and must yet be clarified. We are not to regard God as waiting to punish the sinner for his sin. Now, she doesn't mean discipline. Whom the Lord loves, he disciplines, yes, again and again. She's talking about destruction. We are not to regard God as waiting to punish the sinner for his sin. The sinner brings the punishment upon himself. His own actions start a train of circumstances that bring the sure result. Every act of transgression reacts upon the sinner, works in him a change of character. Remember, we become as worthless as the things we worship through so many books, and makes it more easy for him to transgress again. By choosing to sin, men separate themselves from God, cut themselves off from the channel of blessing, and the sure result is ruin and death. It's a consequence, not an imposed penalty. And that's why at length in other quotations I have here, she says there's nothing arbitrary about the death of the wicked. God simply leaves them to reap the natural results of their own rebellious choice. That's God's wrath. Romans 1, 24, 26, 28, Hosea 11, 2 Chronicles, many, many other places. Which would be more awesome to hear? God thundering at you in anger, or God looking on you with love and saying, I'm sorry to tell you, there's nothing more we can do for you. Which would be worse? When somebody's angry, it stiffens your own spine to resist, doesn't it? But when somebody who loves you and somebody you know would try again and again and again, when that person says, there's nothing more I can do for you, I'm going to let you go, you know that's final. You can't bargain with that. Not when the loved one says it. That's why, to me, it's much more awesome. Some call this a weak picture of God. To me, it's far more powerful when the infinitely loving one says, you're joined to idols. We're going to have to let you go. I mean, I've waited for centuries. You know the way I am. I'd wait now if there were any response, but there is no remedy, and we're going to let you go. And then as we're consumed, we look in his face and he's crying, why will you die? How can I give you up? How can I let you go? Could you fight that? What do the wicked do according to the New Testament? They get down on their knees and admit their loss is their own fault. I don't call that weakness. To me, that is a far greater power, a much more infinite God. Then another picture so widely circulated, where God is seen to have another face called justice. God is not two-faced. To be loving is to be just. To be just is to be righteous. To be righteous is to be merciful. They're all the same thing all the time. God does not change in the end, but he cannot keep cheats in his kingdom. Only if he'd make part of the universe a penitentiary where he could keep them all separate from each other so they couldn't do any damage. And God says, forgive me, I will not run a huge penitentiary for eternity. I will someday let all my cheating children go. What will happen when he lets us go? Go to the cross. And Jesus died. Yes, sin results in death, but it is not torture and execution at the hands of our gracious God. He will sadly give us up as he gave up his Son. And those who misunderstand this are in danger of serving God from fear, which can produce the character of those Sabbath keepers who did torture Jesus to death. Would you want to be like them? Well, it would seem to me the greatest danger that Seventh-day Adventists could have is that in our zeal and desire to be saved, we make the mistake of those devout, Bible-carrying, Sabbath-keeping descendants of Abraham, who've given us the Bible and all these lessons. Wouldn't it be sad for the church to simply add confirmation to God's warning? If you don't know me and yet still feel you have to serve me, you may become my enemies even as you obey. Then shouldn't we spend more time on the picture of God and our relationship with him than on the blueprint? And yet I love to include the blueprint because the one who made such a blueprint has to be wonderfully admirable and skillful. So why separate them at all? Just a matter of keeping it all in balance. And the best way to do that is to do the 66 books, I believe. Because we might do a book on ceremonies in Leviticus and then turn to Hosea. Although, where do you find in the Bible, you shall not hate your neighbor in your heart? That's Leviticus. I really don't find any book you could set off and say, well, now this one's a bit legalistic and this one is the remedy. I find it running all the way through if we stop selecting here a little and there a little and rather take the Bible as a whole. And if it ever becomes a little difficult, the watchword is read on. Of course, if you read on to the end, you'll come to the third angel's message about fire, brimstone, and wrath. And happy the person who's understood the previous 65 books, and he'll be able to explain.